It is our great pleasure to hold this first webinar on the current status of DACA students and future options, and what we as individual psychologists or practitioners can do, and what can we also do to help our universities support the students. As you know, there is great uncertainty about the legislation and about the situation of the students, and we have a couple of lawyers that have graciously volunteered their time to enlighten us and educate us about the process. And we also have a person that is very active here at the University of Illinois at Chicago dealing with this process. So let me introduce to you the speakers. Maria Blanco is the Executive Director of the University of California Immigrant Legal Service Center, which serves the immigration-related legal needs of undocumented and immigrant students at the University of California system. She's a graduate of UC Berkeley School of Law, and she has more than 20 years experience as a litigator and an advocate for immigrant rights, women's rights, and social justice. Rachel Ray is a managing attorney at the UC Immigrant Legal Service Center. She's a graduate from UC Davis School of Law in the Public Service Law Program School and the Whitman College with an art in history and visual culture studies. And her immigration legal experience includes the removal, defense of and the protection of families and humanitarian-based immigration and business immigration work at private firms and nonprofit organizations. And finally, Tania Cabrera is Assistant Vice Provost for Student Inclusion within the University of Illinois at Chicago's Office of Diversity. She chairs the Provost Task Force on Immigration Issues, which implemented mental health, legal, and financial resources for students directly impacted by the changing immigration policies. One of Tania's responsibilities is to ensure the successful matriculation and of undocumented students on the campus. So we are going to start with Rachel. Rachel, go ahead.
So thank you everybody for joining us. As Fabricio said, we provide free immigration legal services to UC students and their immediate family members, and that includes their parents, siblings, spouses, and children. And our contact information is on the slide. I see that one participant is joining by phone. This recording will be available, and so if you have any questions about how to contact us, you can take a look at the slide. You can also search us at UC Immigrant Legal Services Center. So our website, our Twitter, and our Facebook up on the screen. You can advance the slide. Thank you, Fabricio. This is just our general disclaimer. This presentation is meant to be informational only and doesn't constitute specific legal advice. Every individual has a specific process and limitations, and so we recommend that individuals speak with attorneys. And UC students are able to access our services, and so in order to do that, for case-specific legal advice, they can make an appointment with us for an initial intake, and they can contact us for that, and that's specific to UC students, but we always have this information up on our slides. And next slide. So just quick overview for today. Our goals are for the audience to understand the current litigation regarding DACA, briefly discuss proposed litigation or legislation, which is fairly limited at the moment. There's not a ton of movement around that. Review options available to DACA recipients for their future, and also to, as Fabrizio mentioned, identify ways faculty and community psychologists can help students. So now I'll turn it over to Maria.
Concerning DACA, and a little bit about the legislation, to the extent that there's some legislative efforts in DC may or may not be taken off the ground. I'll talk about that. So the reason we have a whole presentation on the litigation is that DACA was officially already rescinded by the administration on September 5th of 2017, sorry. And when that happened, what the administration said was people that have DACA will have it till it runs out, but nobody else can apply for the first time. And people that were applying for advanced parole, the ability to travel, wouldn't have it anymore. So that happened. And then several organizations around the country filed various lawsuits. Some were filed in California, some were filed in Maryland, some were filed in New York, and there was a lawsuit also in Washington, D.C. The first court that considered the issue of whether it was legal to rescind DACA was a court in San Francisco. And in January of this year, that court ordered the administration to continue to process DACA renewals. And it said that even if your DACA had expired and you hadn't moved to renew it, you could do that, or you could renew your DACA just on your regular 2-year process, with that timetable. Shortly after that, there was also an order from a court in New York that basically issued the same injunction as to renewals, but they did not order the administration to process new DACA applications. A couple of other courts, one court went a different way in Maryland. That court said that it was lawful for the administration to rescind DACA. And then there was another court order recently, more recently, let me put it that way, out of DC that said that the administration was not in its rights to rescind DACA. It ordered the administration to keep processing renewals, but interestingly enough, that court said that it was going to order the administration to also process brand new DACA applications if after 90 days, which will run July 23rd, if the administration had not shown good reason for having rescinded DACA. So so basically, those are all the lawsuits that challenge the administration's ability to rescind DACA. So right now, nationally, people are filing renewals, no new DACAs, and no advanced parole. After that, if you go to slide 8, more recently, 7 states, Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Nebraska, South Carolina, and West Virginia, brought a lawsuit in Texas, in a federal court in Texas, challenging the DACA program as unconstitutional and another series of reasons why they believe that the administration, prior administration, when it created the DACA program, that it was not in its rights to do so. That the court that those plaintiffs chose in Texas was the same court that actually had stopped the DAPA, which was the adult program for parents of U.S. citizens, and joined that program that President Obama had issued at the same time that they issued DACA. So right now in that case, it's nothing has happened yet except that MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, did intervene with some DACA recipients, saying that they were going to defend the DACA program. And the reason they felt they had to intervene in that case is that it was this, the state of Texas suing the administration that already had rescinded DACA. So there was a concern that it wouldn't, of course, that the government wasn't going to defend DACA in that lawsuit. But now we have plaintiffs defending it. And they've got a schedule. I don't have it up here on the slideshow. It'll move fairly quickly, that case. And then after those 7 states sued, the California case was heard now by the Court of Appeals. There was a hearing May 15th. So there's sort of 3 things we're waiting for. What happens with the Ninth Circuit? Will they uphold the injunction that the California court issued? Second thing that's happening is we're waiting to see if the case goes forward for new applications for DACA. And third, we're waiting to see what the timetable will be for the lawsuit in Texas. Next slide. Okay, so can you go to the next slide, please? It's slide number 10. So currently, the question we all get is who can apply for DACA now? As I said, right now, people can only renew their DACA. You cannot, if you've never applied for DACA, you can't do so. We're waiting to see what happens with the DC case. If your DACA expired before the administration ended DACA, you can renew. If you already had DACA, and even if it expired and you hadn't renewed for a variety of reasons, you can renew your DACA now. Next slide. What in the past, when people were doing the renewals, the administration, USCIS, said, please don't submit a renewal unless you're within 4 months of the expiration date. Now the advice that everybody's giving is you don't have to wait till you're only 4 months away. You can file for renewals. And we've been doing that, and people have been getting renewals even though their DACA was going to expire 6 or 7 months into the future. The only thing to take into account, if you do not wait the 4 months, if you go ahead and you renew, say, when you're 7 months out, is that when you get your renewal, you're going to have a shorter time. Instead of 2 years on your work authorization, it's going to slice off a chunk of time from your work authorization and from your deferred action. So that's, people are making their own individual decisions about that. Many, many folks are deciding to apply even if they're way, far out from their date of expiration, because at least if everything in the courts is so uncertain that it's better to at least have, say, 1.5 years on your DACA and wait and see what happens in the next 1.5 years. Next slide. So the other thing is, of course, questions that every one of us is receiving about, should I renew under this new administration? A lot of concerns about whether their information will be shared, et cetera, because the administration has been very cagey about whether it's sharing information or not with ICE, when you apply for DACA. One of the court cases did order the administration to not share. So, the general feeling is that right now there is no information sharing. However, because there are no more enforcement priorities for ICE, everybody seems to be fair game, except if you have DACA. We do advise that you check with an attorney if, when you're about to renew, if a couple of things are true for you. One, if you've had contact with the police, if you've been arrested or convicted, or you have any criminal record of any kind, even if it's not a conviction, if you had this before you had DACA, or if you've had it since your DACA, we still advise that you consult with an attorney. We're very concerned, particularly if some of the arrests or convictions are for certain very serious crimes. Even though you might have gotten DACA before, we do want you to talk to an attorney to see if those criminal issues might make it less safe for you to renew. The other thing is, if you've had contact with the immigration authorities, and by contact we mean deportation, an order of deportation, or a deportation, or a removal, or an order of removal. In the past, DACA, when people applied for DACA, people were even able to apply for DACA while they were in detention. So it was, not a barrier for DACA. That is supposed to still be true, but we do want you to consult with an attorney if you've got any kind of order of removal or you've been removed in the past. Finally, if you've moved and changed your address, the reason we say talk to an attorney is really related to the prior two reasons. Even if you have had some kind of contact with immigration or with the law enforcement, and you're concerned about information sharing, and you've moved, we say talk to an attorney. Let me just explain that. If you're living in the same place you've lived and you're applying for a renewal, they already have your home information. But if you're concerned about information sharing and you don't want to give your new address, consult with an attorney about whether in the past you've shared information, but you don't want to share it now. Talk to an attorney before you do your removal. Next slide. So the question now is, what happens next? In terms of the policy, I'm going to be very brief here because there are so what's happening right now in DC, they're trying to do what's called a discharge petition, which means that if a certain very high number of congressmen, congresspeople sign on to a petition, they then will propose, the Congress will consider all the various immigration proposals related to DACA. The ones that are, so we don't have enough signatures yet for the discharge petition. They're about 3 short, and it could happen in the next week and a half. The various proposals that are being considered, if there is a discharge petition signed by enough people, is one that's called the Securing America's Future, which is literally just continuing DACA, making it renewable every 3 years with no path to any kind of permanent status. And a $30 billion allocation to build the famous wall. And it would also propose to cut a lot of lawful immigration, family reunification, basically. This is a very controversial, as you can imagine, proposal because of the border, the cut in immigration, and the fact that there's no path to citizenship or permanent status. There's another bill, the Hurd-Aguilar, called Uniting and Securing America Act. That one would put DACA recipients on the path to a green card. It would appoint more immigration judges, which really is saying, let's clear the backlog. But it also has some border enforcement, but it doesn't include the wall. It's more like heightened border security. Next slide. So the next section, which I think Rachel is gonna cover, is that right? Is whether there are other immigration options for DACA recipients. And Rachel, will you please turn to that slide?
I'm waiting for Maria to mute. Okay, great. So as Maria said, I'll discuss with a little bit of detail other options available to DACA recipients, or that may be available to DACA recipients. So knowing that most of you are not immigration attorneys and may not be familiar with any of the words on this slide or any of the phrases on this slide, I'll explain all of them a little bit. So one of the things that many of you have heard about are spousal petitions or family-based petitions. And what this means is if someone is married to or closely related to someone with a green card or who is a US citizen, that individual with status, immigration status, the green card holder or citizen, can submit a petition for somebody who does not have status. And in the next slide, I'll break that down a little bit. It's not available to absolutely every undocumented person or every person without a green card. There are some particular limitations to it. And so some people may think that if a non-citizen marries a US citizen, that's an automatic path to a green card. And that's not always the case. And I'll break that down on the next slide. So the next few options for relief are options that I want you all to have a working knowledge of as people who work with students in a mental health provision capacity, because you may actually be able to play a role in some of these options for relief. So what is VAWA? That acronym is Violence Against Women Act. And that act provides a particular form of relief available to individuals who are survivors of abuse or extreme cruelty by U.S. citizen spouses, parents, or children, or green card holder, lawful permanent resident spouses, parents, or children. And so to illustrate that for you, if I'm someone who's undocumented and my spouse is a U.S. citizen and that spouse subjects me to abuse or extreme cruelty, and now that doesn't have to be physical abuse, that can be emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, I can submit a petition that will lead me to a green card. And so how can psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors help with that? Well, they may be able to guide someone to an immigration practitioner if they're able to flag that. So in a counseling capacity, if a student comes to me and says, if I'm a campus counselor and the student says, I'm in this monogamous relationship, I'm married to someone who's a US citizen and they've been abusive to me, well, that might flag something for you. And you might remember me talking about VAWA and you can say, hey, have you ever spoken with an immigration practitioner? You might want to talk with them because that abuse can be a path to immigration relief. And VAWA is specific to individuals who are married to or have a biological relationship with someone who's a US citizen or lawful permanent resident. So it's limited to those individuals, but it's a really excellent path for a lot of people for immigration relief. And it's a way to rise above that abuse. Special immigrant, Fabrizio, I'm gonna have you go back to the slide. So I'll go through these forms of relief up until asylum, and then we can advance to the next slide. So special immigrant juvenile status, or SIJS, is available to young people under the age of 21 who can show that they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents, and that reunification with one or both of those parents is not viable, and that returning to their home country is not in their best interest. So this is for young people. We're actually seeing a lot of these cases for our university students. This option is only available to individuals under 21 in the states of California and New York that I know of right now. It is available to all individuals in all states under the age of 18. And a flag for this that's probably fairly easy to remember is if someone does not have a relationship with one or both of their parents. So if you know that someone just lives with their mother or father, or if you know that someone is a foster youth or does not live with either of their parents and doesn't have an official guardian, you may want to encourage them. I mean, you should encourage all of your undocumented, documented, or non-citizen students to talk with an immigration practitioner if they're interested in long-term relief. But those factors, just living with one parent or living with neither parent, can be a flag for you to recognize that that individual might be eligible for special immigrant juvenile status, which is ultimately a path to a green card. A U visa is something that maybe more of you have heard about. It's available for survivors of particular kinds of crimes, and that crime can have occurred in the US or outside of the US. An example of that might be in felonious assault, so an armed robbery where someone experienced physical harm and ongoing emotional harm, and they've reported that crime. So the individual has to report the crime to law enforcement, and law enforcement has to sign off saying that that individual was helpful. But if you interact with a client who lets you know that they've been a victim of a crime or they've survived a crime, you may want to flag U visa for them and encourage them to talk with somebody who might be able to identify this form of relief. There are a lot of nonprofits across the country that help with U visas, VAWA, fewer help with special immigrant juvenile status, but many nonprofits also help with asylum. So brief overview of asylum. Asylum is for individuals who can show that they have experienced persecution or may experience persecution in the future based on their race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Membership in a particular social group is worth explaining briefly. That can be their sexual identity, their gender identity. It can be all sorts of different types of things. Asylum is something that asylum eligible individuals are some client population that we see a little bit less. Most people who are immediately eligible for asylum are individuals who have recently arrived in the United States. There can be a time bar to applying for asylum, which is within 1 year of arrival to the United States. that bar can be overcome. But if you see somebody who is a recent arrival to the United States or who has a deep fear of returning to their home country for a reason other than widespread poverty or something that many people fear, then you might want to flag asylum as a possible form of relief for that individual. So just to reiterate, all of these options can be good options for DACA recipients or undocumented individuals. And they should be identified through comprehensive immigration screening. And I'd like to offer myself up, if any of you feel like you don't have a good referral list for your area, let me know and I can work to provide you with a referral list. Our office has referral lists just for California, but I can work with you to find referrals in your area if you want to. And my contact information will be up on the last slide. I see that there's a question, so I just want to take a quick look at it. And okay, it's a question about VAWA. I'll defer that question for a moment and talk about this next slide. So to go back to family-based petitions, which is a form of immigration relief that is available to a large number of individuals. And actually we see most of our students who we help with long-term relief, it's through a family-based petition, usually through a spousal petition these days. And so I'll break down a little bit more who can actually apply for a green card through a spouse or through a parent. And you can actually apply for a green card through a child, but since we're talking about students and young people, I won't talk about that particular avenue because most of our students don't have a child who is over the age of 21. So I'll illustrate it by using myself as an example. Say I have DACA and I marry a US citizen, and so I want to get a green card through that US citizen. This can also be true for a parent if that parent filed a petition for me before I turned 21. I'm going to use spouses as an example right now. So a green card is only available to me if one of the things below exists. There are a few exceptions perhaps, but this is the easiest way to explain it. So individuals who entered the country with inspection or with a visa. So inspection means that an officer interacted with them in some way and permitted them to come into the United States. So this would not be true if, say, I crossed the border by foot undetected. I do not have a lawful entry and I did not come in with a visa. And so therefore I'm not immediately eligible for a green card. I would have to go through a process of a waiver and go outside of the United States in order to get a green card. That's called consular processing. I won't go through that right now, but certainly there are individuals who did not enter with inspection that can get a green card ultimately. The process is more complicated. So if you know somebody came to the United States with a tourist visa or another kind of visa, perhaps a work visa like an H-1B, and they have a US citizen spouse, a green card may be ultimately available to them. When DACA recipients were able to apply for something called advanced parole, and many of our students went abroad to study abroad with advanced parole, this was available to DACA recipients before DACA was rescinded in September. If I am a DACA recipient and I actually was able to travel abroad and then I re-entered the country, got a stamp in my passport that said that I'd re-entered the country with permission, then I'm able to apply for a green card. So in these two first scenarios, I was able to get a stamp in my passport or some sort of acknowledgement, or I'm able to argue that I was lawfully admitted to the United States. The last box on the slide says that if I had a petition that was filed for me or a parent or a spouse before April 30th, 2001, there's a special waiver available to me. It's called a 245I petition. And so that can waive the fact that I did not come into the country with permission. So this is all to say that even if you marry a US citizen, it is not super easy to get a green card. And also the wait time at this point is at least a year in most states to actually get the green card. So to apply for the green card and receive the green card, have your interview. And there's also a cost associated with all of this. It's well over $1,000, or I believe it's $1,070 at this point, but there is a fee associated with it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Maria to give an overview, a reminder about rights.
Yes. So what has always been the case in terms of constitutional rights for questioning and for searches, both of your car and your person and your home, has become even more important in this era that with an administration that's very aggressively trying to find people, particularly with prior orders of deportation, but almost anybody who's here unlawfully. So in the face of that very aggressive policy now by ICE, by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, we find ourselves in a situation where a lot of our work is reminding people that no matter what your status is, no matter whether you're undocumented, whether you're a citizen, etc., you have the same Fourth Amendment rights as everybody else. And those consist of, you have the right to remain silent if you're asked questions by law enforcement. And what people need to understand is that ICE is law enforcement. They don't have, I mean, it's a different kind of law enforcement, but the rights, that the Fourth Amendment rights that you have apply for ICE as well as for police. So you have the right to remain silent. Somebody cannot search your person, your car, or your home without a warrant. And the warrant has to be based on that there's probable cause. Of course, people can consent to a search. And a lot of times people don't know their rights. So if somebody approaches their car or comes to their home or to their dorm, they think they have to let them search. They don't know their rights. And so once you agree to somebody to allow law enforcement to search, you've consented, quote unquote, to a search. So that's why we remind people that you have, one, the right to refuse a search of your property or yourself or your home, and they have to have a warrant, not an ICE administrative warrant that says we're here to deport you. You have the right to a warrant issued by a court before somebody can search your premises or search you. You have the right to leave even if they detain you. If they don't have a warrant and you're not under arrest, you have the right to leave. Even if the law enforcement says you don't, then what you ask is, am I under arrest? And if the answer is no, you're not, you can leave. These have become really important rights in the moment we're living in. And it's very important, I think, for all anybody that works with immigrants, whether it's in whatever capacity, not even a legal capacity, teachers in schools, university administrators, dorm residents. We do this training a lot for RAs that are residents at the dorms at the university. It's so people need to know these rights and repeatedly remind people of them and explain them, because it is very hard in the moment when you are faced with a law enforcement officer to sort of remember that you have the right to these to a warrant if they're going to search you. So I think one of the things we do is once a quarter or several times a quarter or several times in a semester, we have refreshers, know your rights refreshers, because people have to be comfortable with this, because at the moment when law enforcement stops you, people get extremely nervous. Next slide. So I think now we're turning it over to, which slide is this? Tanya, I think. Let me mute.
Thank you, Maria. Tanya Cabrera from UIC, and I just want to come through terminology for some of the institutions of higher ed who may be on. The different terminology within the undocumented immigrant community. Undocumented student who may have entered the U.S. in two different ways, without inspection or with fraudulent documents, or they entered legally with a visa but remained in the U.S. without legal authorization. Another group of undocumented community is our temporary protected status. Those who entered with temporary protected status are also impacted under the current political climate. The mixed status households within undocumented student families, where that will be maybe someone who has DACA, someone who may be an immigrant or a legal citizen, and someone who may not have been eligible for DACA. The term Dreamers was a term with regard to the DREAM Act and the movement in 2010. But a lot of students who've been fighting for this cause over the years are trying to step away from the Dreamer narrative and be more inclusive. So we're asking institutions to recognize that, and when we talk about the undocumented community, that we not refer to students as Dreamers, but as a collective of undocumented immigrants. Next slide. So there's several different ways on our campus that Rachel referred to with how can we provide support. One of the big thing is educating, right? Every moment is a teaching moment. So we want to make sure that we're reaching out to, very thankful for our administration and being proactive versus reactive, and bringing everybody together under the task force on immigration issues to conduct trainings throughout campus to our faculty and staff and students. The resources that we have available on campus and off our campus with community-based organizations, as well as being up to date with changing policies that are happening. Reviewing current policies at our institution is very important. For example, we looked at it, how Homeland Security comes on our campus, and we modeled after the Dominican University in partnership with Moni Velasco, who was formerly with NIJC, creating a policy on how Homeland Security comes on campus. If we have international students, there are random visits, but as an institution, we control how they come on campus, when they come on campus, and the protocol what we decide. So we could review that in order to make our students feel safe on our college campuses. And as an institution, I hope that you're doing that. We also enacted an opportunity. Students said that they were paying funding for school. We don't have money to see an immigration lawyer. There's a wait. They had urgent questions. We were able to hire 2 part-time immigration lawyers who provided legal review to our students versus in their DACA cases, or if they just had questions, which was really beneficial just to have someone on your campus to provide those resources. Also directly hiring someone who directly supports this population. There's very different student support services across campus, but actually hiring someone to do this work to support this community and make sure as this cohort matriculates through the institution that they're given the support that they need, especially under the current political climate. We have to understand that the immigrant community is very diverse. It's not just a Latino targeted community, and understanding that culture matters and alternative forms of self-care. We understood that a lot of students would not go directly to the counseling center to someone they didn't know who may not have been able to relate. So we were able to hire a part-time counselor who worked and had experience with immigrant and refugees. So we wanted to be conscious of who we're bringing to the table to support our students. And I think this is something that each of the institutions have to put together to support the students while they're on campus. And it's important that we also look, you could go back, I'll get to that slide. So just to go back with regards to looking at our policy and procedures on our campus and seeing what we need to look at and that can be changed to create those safe spaces for our students. And then this is something that I do with my students. You could do the next slide, Fabricio. It's important under FERPA that we understand the Freedom, Education, Rights, and Privacy Act, that the directory information that is on our institutional websites, I encourage my students if they're coming to campus and if they're currently enrolled to suppress the directory information, which can be done with their registrar. The following information listed below all appears during the directory information. So if I were to enter Tanya Cabrera to bring up all my information, an actual photograph of me. So this is where I tell my students, in order to protect them, to suppress the directory information. It's an option, I don't make it mandatory, but this is a way that we can protect our third-party entities from contacting or getting a hold of students who they may assume or identify as being undocumented. Next slide. My colleague Dana Rush here, and along with the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health group here in Illinois, got together to talk about a little bit of the phases of trauma that students experience and how they may have been acting withdrawn in class, very uneasy when entering the room, constantly looking around to seeing if someone was entering or exiting, if anybody was taking pictures, so on and so forth. What I've noticed a lot amongst my students is fatigue, obviously anxiety and stress, dehydration. The fear and anxiety is real, and we have to be mindful that words matter when we're on our college campuses, the conversations that we have, to be mindful of the verbiage that we're using and not be sympathetic, but be empathetic. An example I would use would be, "Oh, I'm really sorry you're going through this, Tanya. It's unfortunate." Respond to your students, even if you may not have the answer. "Hey, Tanya, I understand. We had a training on this. Let me connect you with so-and-so. And if they don't have the answer, I can redirect you to someone else." So being supportive, and this is where the training comes in within our college campuses. Next slide. You could do the next slide now. And something that the matriculation slide, the one before that. You got to go back. There you go, right there. So when we meet with students, we had to make sure that on a case-by-case basis, each student is different, but making a timeline of, should they be coming as an incoming freshman? Should they be coming in as a transfer student because of the financial situations of the majority of these families? Looking for the resources. Also exploring financial options towards their degree completion. When we look at our policies within our scholarships, how can we identify whether the scholarship from private gift funding is open to an undocumented student, right? And sharing those resources with them and making the financial plan to make sure that they matriculate. Another opportunity for engaging students to make sure that they matriculate successfully is connecting them to networking opportunities for job placement and mentorship. I feel like a lot of my students, it's such a stress to juggle work, the current political climate, maintaining relationships with friends, employers, and doing school and family. It's a lot on their plate. And so a lot of the students struggle with, hey, what am I going to do after I leave the institution? What type of resources? Well, I actually get 3 weeks of vacation time. What's a 401k? So having those conversations early on, so then when they leave the institution, that we can continue to, they are prepared to be successful of life after college. I'm trying to see. Fabricio, can you bring up the slide? I can't. Okay. Connecting students with one another for peer support is a very huge resources that I'm really thankful that students, not only from the community colleges, but from institutions here in Illinois, have come together to have those conversations. And one more thing prior to commencement, securing job placement for students, those who may be running out of DACA, that Rachel said, what alternative options do they have to obtain employment opportunities? Next slide. And I'm going to pass this on. I think this was Rachel's slide.
Thank you, Tanya. So what can people on campus do? Well, there are a number of different resources you can provide documented and undocumented students with. You can provide them with DACA-related resources. So the links that I have up on the screen are specific to DACA. And another item that I'll add to this is actually on the next slide, but I'd like to mention it, is the Mission Asset Fund. And the Mission Asset Fund has loans. They previously had funding, but now they have loans available to individuals who want to renew their DACA. Yeah, thanks, Fabricio. So financial considerations can be a huge barrier for individuals who want to renew their DACA, but there are options available to them, including loans. And Mission Asset Fund has, I believe, very low or maybe no interest rate loans available. So that's a great option for them. And Fabricio, if you can go back to the previous slide, that would be great. So the DREAM.us is an organization that does a lot of advocacy around DACA recipients. NILC, or the National Immigration Law Center, has really great resources even beyond DACA. Same with ILRC, the Immigration Legal Resource Center. And the last link in this little list, IMMI.org. IMMI is actually an immigration screening tool, and it's one that we've vetted and other organizations have vetted, and it doesn't provide legal advice, but it allows for individuals to explore some options that might be available to them. It's sort of a pre-screening if you're going to see an immigration practitioner. And Tanya's letting me know that UIC is a Dream US partner for transfer students. So that's a great resource for UIC students. And as we've been sort of drilling in you all throughout this presentation, encourage your students to investigate potential long-term options by speaking with a licensed attorney. And that can be a private attorney, it can be somebody at a nonprofit. They can do this screening at IMMI just to see if they think it might be, if there might be options available to them. An immigration consultation runs anywhere from no cost at a nonprofit to possibly about $200 with a private practitioner. And so certainly cost is a consideration, but it can be very valuable. If someone has never had an immigration consultation, I think it's well worth trying to find the money to do that. If you're looking to direct people towards immigration legal services, Immigration Advocates is a nonprofit organization that has a legal directory that they maintain updated pretty well. And it's a resource that I use when I'm trying to refer out of state. And so that's a way for you to search if you're not located in California, or if you, in the future, are looking for somebody to refer your clients to. Obviously, mental health care provision is an amazing resource for students. Continue to provide those mental health support services and resources to students. I like what Tanya said about alternative counseling or alternative self-care. Certainly individuals receive that type of care in all sorts of different ways. And advocating on students' behalf. So one of the ways that our center came into existence is advocacy on behalf of the students, but also advocacy on behalf of individuals who are employed by the universities. And so just by being employed at the university, you can advocate for students. A couple of things that I wanted to add to this list are, there are Know Your Rights cards and Know Your Rights resources available on the internet through actually a couple of these organizations on this screen. And so if your students don't have Know Your Rights information, you can print out Know Your Rights cards, you can order Know Your Rights cards from the Immigrant Legal Resource Center or other organizations. And those rights, somebody asked earlier if those rights are differ by state. The rights do not differ by state. The way that local law enforcement asks for information does differ state by state. Another question that's kind of related to, and I know we have a question slide coming up, but I wanted to respond to this question as well. Somebody asked about providing psychological evaluations. So some of you may have done this. Psychological evaluations are a really important part for what I would call humanitarian immigration legal routes. So VAWA, U visas, special immigrant juvenile status, asylum, even waivers and consular processing. These are all forms of immigration relief or paths to green cards. And we use psychological evaluations in all of these forms of relief. So having a really strong partner as a psychologist or a psychiatrist is a really great resource for us as attorneys and a great resource for the clients. So the question from the individual was about providing psychological evaluations and a specific question about how to handle that evaluation. And I'm happy to talk with that individual offline. My contact information will be on a slide in just a moment, and I'd be happy to connect with you about that later. If you have questions about providing evaluations, I can answer some of those questions, but I definitely encourage you to talk with the attorney who's requested the evaluation. We're not allowed, just to answer generally a question that we received, we're not allowed to tell you how to write evaluations, but we can work collaboratively with you on sort of bettering an evaluation or making sure the evaluation talks about the things we needed to talk about. So without delaying further, I think, Fabrizio, would you like to open it up to other questions?
Yes, please. Any questions that the people in the audience might have? Please.
We have the one question from Noria about VAWA. Was that actually answered?
So, sorry, Maria. So I'd be happy to speak with, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I'd be happy to speak with Noria offline. It's a fairly particular question. She's asking if you can include in an evaluation that an attorney asked you for the evaluation. I don't see a particular problem with that. I think as long as you're not alluding to the attorney writing the evaluation for you or telling you how to write the evaluation, then, oh, sorry, I guess that question was from someone named Mary. So Mary, I think it's fine to include that fact. I don't think you have to include it, but I don't see a particular reason not to. I think the concern on somebody's behalf might just be that in stating that an attorney requested that evaluation, it may suggest that the attorney was involved in the particulars of the writing of the evaluation. And I see another question that I'm happy to answer, which is, can psychological evaluations be provided through campus counseling, or does it require different or specialized training? So I don't think so. I think it depends on the evaluation. My short answer to that is any evaluation is better than no evaluation. Mm-hmm. So if you're concerned about how to write an evaluation, there are absolutely resources, and I can direct you to those resources. If you're working closely with an attorney, they can provide you with a sample. I can't think of a website where those samples are available, but there is a collaborative in the Bay Area that works on this issue, and I work pretty closely with them, and I can see if they have samples that they might be willing to share with a group like you. So it really depends on the type of evaluation, but I think the bottom line is any evaluation is better than no evaluation, as long as it's a sympathetic evaluation. And a related question is, which is more helpful, a report from the counselor or a psychological evaluation, or both? I think it depends on the particular needs of the case. There are some opinions that somebody who has been seeing someone long-term is not able to provide an objective evaluation of, say, mental health or a particular issue. But if someone is, say, a U visa applicant, and we want to show that they have ongoing trauma as a result of a particular crime, then I think a report from a counselor would be very helpful. I think both options can be good, and it really depends on the case. So I'm just reading through the questions, so thank you for your patience.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Tanya to perhaps respond to Bianca's question.
Question about what are some of the best ways to make your students feel comfortable about talking about their status, and many times they don't say anything until the last minute. I'm wondering if maybe Tanya wants to speak to that.
Tanya?
Like I said, each student is different, and it just makes our work a little harder. But it's just, I know they don't eat, so my first question is like, hey, have you eaten anything? And like, hey, even though I may have eaten, I'm like, hey, are you hungry? I was thinking of grabbing something. Oh, okay. Treat them to lunch, break bread with them, and just have a conversation of like, okay, tell me a little bit more about yourself. How can I support you? Or maybe through orientation right now, throughout the summer, as new students are coming to campus, putting it out there that there's support for our undocumented students at our institution. You can contact Tanya Cabrera here, blah, 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 blah. But being open and having that information posted public, or some signage of undocumented student access here, undocumented students welcome here, so on and so forth. A big butterfly is used around the undocumented community as a symbol for support. And so if you have something, I'm not sure if Educators for Fair Consideration transitioned in the name change already. No? Okay. So on their website, they have materials that you can purchase, really affordable for our institutions and even for high school counselors. But getting to know them, it's not going to happen overnight, but continuing the conversation, developing the relationship as you would with any other colleague, but with these students, and then hopefully have them trust you, or kind of see that hey, everybody goes to her, or so-and-so goes to her. Hey, maybe I can go to her or him as well, and get that support. And I also want to be mindful that when we're working with our students with disabilities, and those students who may have a disability but may have not gotten diagnosed but identify as having a disability, making sure that we're providing support to them as well in this community.
Great. Maria, would you like to address Gina's question about California?
that don't see the question is, in California, we recently had a series of new laws that basically are state sanctuary laws that encourage and actually in some cases mandate that institutions not do information sharing with ICE. I would say that at least in California, and they just went into effect very recently, so people are still trying to figure out. The way I interpret this is, at the University of California, we have the statement of principles that our president issued about not sharing written information, student records, everything that I described about only allowing people with warrants to come into classrooms and into dormitories and into hospital facilities. So, for example, since that already existed for the University of California, the state law, we would have been okay even without the new state law. So I don't think that it adds anything to what the University of California was already doing, and to what Tanya said was already the case with the Privacy Act, FERPA, for student records. But for institutions that don't have sort of a sanctuary policy that they've promulgated, then I think that the new state law really does matter, because it basically insists that institutions do not share information about their students, because FERPA only covers academic records and not really directory information, which is, as Tanya recommended, why it's good to try and get your students to not disclose their directory information, because FERPA doesn't really protect that. And FERPA doesn't protect, for example, in California, we have scholarships available through the states to undocumented students. It's the DREAM Act. And the very first question on your DREAM Act application is, do you have a social security number? So financial aid offices that distribute the Cal Grants have that information. Now, the University of California has said we're not going to share that, but another educational institution within California might not have that same policy. In that case, the state law that says you don't share the information really does matter. The one thing that I think is very important is that most public universities and public colleges, not just in California, but generally, believe that in terms of ICE coming onto campus, that they don't have the ability to say no to that, because it is a public space, the public university. But like Tanya said, it does, you can regulate it to some extent. You can try and do things like ask ICE to check in when if they're going to come into campus, that they don't do so. But you can't really at a public institution keep them from coming in. Some of the new state laws in California relate to the workplace. It had in California now, because of our new state law, if ICE comes to the workplace, the employer has to follow the California law that requires warrants for searches of a workplace. In the past, the employer could basically consent to have ICE come in. That doesn't, it's not a neat fit with college, even though colleges are employers. It really is more when ICE comes on to look at records, that they keep for their employees. So I think that's a long answer to the question, which is that what California is doing and what the University of California is doing is basically, in essence, insisting on the adherence to the Fourth Amendment, So there's no conflict between federal laws and state laws that I can see.
There was a comment that somebody made about the availability of forms like power of attorney and protection of children. If you are a parent and you have underage children and something happens.
Yes, I saw that.
Property.
So yeah, so one of the things, and it's a very depressing thing to work with people in regards to, but people are, students, as you know, often are worried about their family members, not just themselves. And so one of the things that people nationally are doing is recommending that students or family members put together what's called a family preparedness plan, which basically lays out if a parent were to be apprehended by ICE, here are the things that should happen. So you have a family preparedness plan that allows the school to release your child to another adult, a family member, or a close family friend. A family preparedness plan could include a phone tree of people to call in the event something happens to a family member, and in particular to parents if something that of young children. But even with adult family members, the family preparedness plan puts into place calls that have to be made, medical information, etc. And it really is so that when that moment comes, if somebody is apprehended, that there's a plan for what the family can do. And it actually should include, at some point, how do you track down a family member that's been detained by ICE? What are the different phone numbers, etc., to figure out where your family member is being held? So there are many, ILRC, the Immigrant Legal Resource Centers, has very, and I think so does NILC, the National Immigration Law Center, has samples of what a family preparedness plan should look like. It's very important for schools that have children who may be documented, but their parents are undocumented, to have these on hand, to have this paperwork on hand, because often the students might be in school when something happens to their parents.
Great. I just want to mention that Nuria Schiofalo shared a website that provides some of the information that is very useful. And the website is called Psychological Evaluations for Immigration Court, one word, .net. Thank you, Nuria. Bianca has another question. We are running into problems in terms of financial aid. Tanya, would you like to address that?
Sorry, they're running into problems with financial aid. We're running into problems in terms of financial aid. We had a student who needed the financial aid information of the dad, but the student and family were scared to go in and ask the IRS. I'm afraid to suggest any thoughts since I am not sure. Do you mean the students coming up for verification by the Office of Financial Aid? At UIC, we don't encourage completion of DACA. We don't actually create award packages for students, but we don't encourage FAFSA completion, period. It's basically they complete the documentation, show the need, and at the end they get a message saying, hey, unfortunately, you would have been eligible for this aid, but because of your status, look into private scholarships, so on and so forth. And it's really, I'm not sure why they do that. I know the U.S. Department of Education encourages it, but each institution has their alternative financial aid forms that they utilize within their financial aid office. And I believe that a student can request that information to seek what other financial opportunities may be available, mainly at private institutions. In the state of Illinois, we haven't passed a law. We're working on a bill called the Illinois Access Bill that will open up pathways for public institutions in the state of Illinois, public four-year institutions to provide access, financial access to undocumented students. I'm in California.
Yeah, I think this question, though, we get this a lot, is about even students that are documented, so they are eligible, but they have to show financial need, and that means providing information about the family's income. But so the concern is the student may be documented, but the parents are not. And then people are very nervous about trying to come up with the W-2s or whatever for the parent in order to get the financial aid they need, even though they're citizens. Is that correct? I think that's the way I interpret this question. The fear that's created about the parent status, even if the student is eligible.
I'm not sure if that was Gina's question, but I know that I've run into that situation with students who could not fill out the FAFSA because of their parents' situation.
I was just consulting with Rachel. We don't really deal with the financial aid aspect of things. We have, the Undocumented Student Center does. I think, the reason I'm hesitating is there are different ways that the parent might have their financial information. It depends on whether they work, if they work under the table for cash, they might not even have the information that's necessary for the FAFSA application. And if they are working and have a W-2 and the parents are undocumented, then they're probably working not with unlawfully, in the sense that they're probably using somebody else's social security number, or else they wouldn't be able to work. So I think that the question isn't so much the fear that IRS will be talking to ICE. The question is really about revealing that your parent who's undocumented is working. And I think that is problematic. And I think that one of the things with the offices that deal, which there are a lot of on the various campuses, the undocumented student programs that handle this situation commonly, really, it's a very nuanced question, because there might be other ways to show what the family income is. The family may have used, I-10, and which is not a social security, but they have may have paid taxes using an I-10. So I think you'd really need to make sure that your financial aid officer is knowledgeable. This goes back to what we've been saying the whole webinar, that they have to be familiar, and maybe it means that the financial aid office has to have a good relationship with the undocumented student program at your college, because there may be ways to gather the requisite financial aid information that doesn't put the parent not so much in danger of ICE, but in danger of revealing that they've worked without authorization. There may be other ways around it.
Great. Are there any other questions? Well, I want to thank the panel members for their time and their willingness to help. It has been very, very interesting conversation. We are very grateful. This conversation is going to be posted in our website and available in YouTube later on for those of you who are interested. Jean, can you take out the information so we get the information about the questions, so we can see the contact information? Right now I cannot see it, but I don't know if the other people.
You mean the contact information from the presenters?
Yes, it is below. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's we can put that up on the website. That's not a problem.
Okay. Yeah. Well, right now people cannot see it because I see the questions on top of it.
No, they can see it for
we can see it.
Oh, okay. Good. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate the opportunity to have had this conversation. So, thanks a lot to the panelists.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was really great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.